On a Friday, and it is a Friday leading into, weather permitting, knock on wood, the season finale for the NTT IndyCar Series in Nashville. And so, therefore, I am in Nashville. Away, Eddie, do you miss me? Because I am down in Nashville and you are in Indianapolis, and I can tell, I can feel it from some 250 miles away that you're missing my presence in the studio.
You think
correct?
I'm missing your presence 45 seconds into the show?
No, we were on the phone a little bit ago, and I could tell. I could feel there was like this weird lack of pep in your step in terms of your voice.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. But we have a big show lined up today, and it is going to be mostly about, of course, the gridiron. The Colts and the Green Bay Packers will be the big storyline as they get set to go to Lambeau. And the question marks, of course, who is going to be playing or not playing in the game itself. Now, this is not as big a storyline for the Colts as you look at it, and just so that everybody knows, to kind of get everybody up to speed, the availability as we know it right now. Here's where things stand going into today for the Colts. Matt Gay, the kicker, was a full participant in practice yesterday, and it looks like he is going to be good to go. And, of course, he had the hernia injury and a procedure on the hernia. Did not kick in week number 1, struggled a bit the preseason, but he is expected, I think you could say, to go in Lambeau because he had full participation yesterday in practice. But we won't know until a couple of hours from now where things stand in terms of what everybody is doing today. The other players that are in question are as follows. One of those would be Josh Downs. Josh Downs, who the wide receiver, and working his way back. I'm trying to think, Eddie, on what the exact timetable was in terms of when he was injured, because it was thought to be, 4 to 6 weeks? But that happened right at the beginning of camp, correct?
Yeah, it happened 4 weeks ago from last Thursday, I want to believe. So yesterday was the 5-week mark, and as it pertains to practice today, they actually just went underway for their walkthrough. Kevin Bowen says that he has not spotted DeForest Buckner, who's dealing with a back injury, or Julian Blackman, who's dealing with a shoulder injury. However, Josh Downs with the ankle and Kwity Paye with the hamstring injuries are both practicing.
Okay, so, and again, as we talked about yesterday, Downs was limited yesterday. DeForest Buckner, Kwity Paye, and Julian Blackman, those players all yesterday were held out of practice, and so that becomes, a storyline certainly to watch. The other is that of Green Bay on their side of things, probably the bigger storyline. And here's the interesting thing. So we do, and I'm going to ask for a bit of a grading curve on this. Not unusual. When I was in school, I was somebody that always relied upon the curve in terms of grading. So I'm going to ask for the curve in this regard, and that is that I want people to know when they post our score predictions for the Colts game each and every week, I don't mean to give – today's a peek behind the curtain Friday because it's Total Transparency Friday. That's what today is, Total Transparency Friday, and you're going to find out why I call it that here as we go on throughout the course of the show today with a couple of transparent things. But one of those is that when they ask us to give our score prediction for the Colts games each and every week, a lot of times they ask us like on Thursday or early on Friday morning, which is cool. I get it. But oftentimes we don't really know who the critical players are going to be in the game. So much depends upon whether or not Jordan Love is playing for Green Bay. Because not only, and I don't know whether or not, and nobody knows whether or not Jordan Love is the guy, right? We can assume it. We think that all signs are that that's the case. And he certainly last year, showed, okay, this guy there's a reason that Green Bay was patient on him. Here they go again. They go from one quarterback to the next, and it always seems to work out for them in that regard. And kudos to them for that. And he certainly looked the part last year. But we have seen guys that out of the box in the NFL look like the guy, and then water finds its level. People figure them out, and they start looking at scouting, filming, tape, everything else. And guys regress a little bit. But Jordan Love, I think we can say safely, is a good player. We know he's going to be a good player in the NFL. And he is certainly a better player than Malik Willis. Whether or not Jordan Love can go in this game is huge for Green Bay. Because going up to Lambeau and playing – and look, they have a dynamic running game. The Colts just got completely thrashed against Houston against the run. But it was a little bit different because when you have C.J. Stroud under center, you have to respect that, and that makes your defense softer automatically, and Joe Mixon was able to exploit that, and Houston was able to take care of that. I realize that Green Bay can run the football, but if you've got Malik Willis back there, you bring everybody up into the box because Willis not only in Tennessee – when he got opportunity, did not look like a guy that was going to be able to make plays in the NFL. This is a guy that was a late addition in Green Bay, and certainly I think in Green Bay, where, Eddie, you made the point that this is a franchise that has had a history of masterfully, like, having a backup plan at the quarterback position, and now all of a sudden they don't seem to have one.
No.
And Willis is a guy that, you know, I'm sitting here trying to throw dirt on the grave of his career, but he does not scare you. And if he's going, I think I said 27-19, something like that. If Malik Willis is playing and starting in this game for Green Bay, I do not see how the Colts go up there and do anything other than get a win. But, again, if Jordan Love is playing, things are different there. So it's a little bit hard to know, right? It's a little bit hard to know. But, we'll see. Now, Eddie, we don't have any of the latest information, if you will, as the status of Jordan Love at this point, correct?
Correct. It seems very, very likely that he will not play on Sunday. He has yet to practice this week, and Josh Jacobs, by the way, has also been banged up and limited in practice all week. At least in the early goings with a back injury. So that's something else to monitor with the Green Bay offense because obviously if Jordan Love can't suit up, it's going to be a lot of Josh Jacobs. And outside of that, you're looking at Jaden Reed, who, by the way, Jake is on your fantasy team in the Querying Company League. And
that's right.
you had him on your bench for that 34 points that he put up last week, you know.
And
right. Then Christian Watson. Those are their two primary receivers. Both of them are very, very explosive. You saw what Jaden Reed could do on Friday night against Philly. In that game, 3 touchdowns, and he had an additional one that was called back because of a penalty. But right now, the two key players on the offense for Green Bay do appear to be banged up, so it's in the Colts' favor. And earlier in the week, you did make that manifestation that you felt like things were going to start to go their way and they were going to get a couple breaks this year.
I'm telling you, that's the seasons for NFL teams oftentimes go 1 or 2 – oftentimes – sometimes Lady Luck's either on your side and the ball bounces your way, or you just have one of those years where nothing goes your way. And health is a big part of that, and opposition health is a big part of that. And we'll see what happens with that. But a lot of discussion about that over the course of today. Kevin Bowen going to join us in the 2 o'clock hour, and we will discuss further and have a better idea then of who might be in or out with the Colts in Green Bay. I assume that we probably, over the course of today, it will come up. Don't typically talk a lot of external NFL, but Eddie, last night that game between Miami and Buffalo, with Buffalo getting the win, there are not a lot of times that I would probably opine about the health or the status of an opposing team's quarterback that is not playing for the Colts that week because it's, we're an Indianapolis show. But the situation with Tua is a fascinating one because, and I think we saw it here in Indianapolis with Austin Collie. I remember when Austin Collie got hit over the middle on a pass play and his arms basically went straight up into the air and, we knew that he was concussed. And there were so many people right then that were like, Austin Collie needs to retire because the visual was so difficult. He went on to play for a few more years before then ultimately retiring. I think he even played in Canada. But Tua and his concussion history, I realized that last night, when you look at the hit, Damar Hamlin, coincidentally enough, when you talk about injuries that startle one on national television, but I believe it was Damar Hamlin that the contact was made. It wasn't necessarily an egregious or an overly aggressive or violent hit to the head for Tua, but he again left the game under the symptoms or the protocol of concussion. And I think what that shows is that neurologically speaking, I am not a neurologist. Please don't think that I'm pretending to be one. But neurologically speaking, it was alarming because it looks like it is becoming lesser and lesser a severe hit that can lead to a concussion for Tua because of his history of concussions. And I think we know enough now about the long-term effect that can take place that I would not in any way, shape, or form blame him, his family, whoever else, if he decides to start taking now, if that is the sign that – and I know he has a huge contract out there, but I just think that those things now are more – on the public thought than they were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that was the takeaway that I had from that game last night, aside from the fact that Buffalo, in a year that people thought they were going to drop off, and it was thought that, Buffalo and Miami, that's the top two teams in the East probably, depending on what the Jets can do. Solid win for Buffalo. Speaking of Buffalo, I'm excited about this. And I had mentioned about a month ago that I wanted to do a segment we call Former Colt Friday. And then, Eddie, my understanding is that we may have to change the name if we get it promoted because we can't have Colt in the name of the show, right? Or in the name of the segment. Is that correct?
I think so.
Okay. But we haven't heard from the legal folks yet, right?
No.
Okay. So on Former Colt Friday, one of the guys that I was fascinated to try to reach was Mike Vanderjagt. Because Mike Vanderjagt was a very polarizing player during his time in Indianapolis. He arrived in Indianapolis kind of unannounced. Kerry Blanchard had been a good kicker and a popular kicker for the Colts. And all of a sudden, here's this kind of brash, bleach blonde-haired Canadian guy that's tan, had an earring, that was a little bit unconventional for kickers. Taller guy, just very self-confident. And people were like, what are they doing here? I love Kerry Blanchard. And suddenly Vanderjagt wins that job, but he hits a lot of kicks. And he had one of the most prolific kicking seasons in the history of the NFL. He made every single extra point, every single field goal. He was a dynamic kicker. He hit big kicks for the Colts. But when it came down to it, early in his time in Indianapolis, he did an interview in Toronto where he questioned, I believe it was after the Colts had lost to the New York Jets in the playoffs, and he questioned the overall leadership and tenacity of Peyton Manning. That led to Manning, of course, reacting to that with the infamous, we're talking about our liquored up kicker we're talking about our idiot kicker that got liquored up and ran his mouth. Those were the words from Peyton Manning. And Vanderjagt kind of became known as the idiot kicker or the liquored up kicker, depending on who you asked. And even in hitting big kicks and playing for a number of years beyond that scuffle, that became kind of his MO. But he still hit big kicks. But the last kick that he kicked as an Indianapolis Colt was the one that he missed against Pittsburgh in a year that it was a fait accompli that the Colts were going to win the Super Bowl. And they struggled that entire game. Manning got picked off by Polamalu. It looked to be over. Jerome Bettis fumbled. Nick Harper picked it up, returned it, got tripped up by Ben Roethlisberger. But the Colts had a chance to go to overtime, and Vanderjagt trotted out on the field, and it seemed like an automatic that the RCA Dome was going to get free football. And he went very wide right. He stood and answered every question that day. He went on Letterman and kind of flippantly made a comment about it that did not please Bill Polian. He was released by the Colts, and he went to Dallas. And that really was the last time that in Indianapolis that Mike Vanderjagt spoke. But I reached out to him for this segment. He agreed to do it, and I'm going to give a glimpse behind the curtain here. Transparency Friday. He's very transparent in the interview, but we actually previously recorded it because of the fact that I'm down here, and it worked out best for his schedule, so that's what we did. It is incredibly enlightening about the situation with Manning, and he told me something about why he missed the kick against Pittsburgh that stunned me. And I think people are going to be surprised not only at his transparency, but his vulnerability. And I look forward to people hearing from him and getting their reaction as well. And the interview with Mike Vanderjagt is next on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
But I am actually really excited about our next guest because I have told the story several times. In the years that I have covered sports, every once in a while an athlete does something and you say to yourself, you know what, I got to hand it for massive amounts of respect. And I've told the story before about one of the more difficult situations that I've seen for an athlete to have to endure was when Mike Vanderjagt missed a critical kick against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I walked in the locker room, and the guy's standing at his locker with his uniform on, and he's like, all right, guys, let's go, whatever you need. And he sat there and answered every single question, and I've always had huge respect for that. Not sure that I ever had the chance to tell him I had mad respect for him for that, but he joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, Mike Vanderjagt. So I will begin by simply saying that, Mike, at the time, I never had a chance to thank you or tip my cap for the fact that you answered every single question, but I thought it was super cool, man. How are you?
Well, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
You know, can't complain. Here we are. We are amidst the Colts season, and, you know, I was looking through players that I wanted to catch up with, and I thought, well, Vandy'd be great, but I don't even know where he is. So I guess the first question I would have for you is, we find you where today?
Well, so first of all, let's back up for a second. So if we're really reminiscing about my Pittsburgh kick, you know, my therapist tells me I need to talk about it. So,
okay,
just kidding. Listen, I missed a total of 2 field goals that entire year in 17 games. Okay, so let's just, for the record, I'm not sure you can hang the fact that we didn't win the Super Bowl on 1 of 2 missed kicks in 17 games. But anyway, I digress. So, having said that, I have 3 acres on Lake Ontario, so I am right now on my back deck staring at Lake Ontario.
Man, that's pretty good. So life is good for you, which is good to hear, right? And what, other than talking and reminiscing and looking over Lake Ontario, your day-to-day life now consists of what?
Well, I have been running a company for 10 years. I have a lot of very well-known athletes as partners of mine over the years. I've had Troy Aikman, Johnny Damon, Kobe Jones, Steve Smith from the NBA, Mike Modano from the Dallas Stars. I've recently Bo Jackson, and some of you might know a guy named Dwight Freeney. So doing a lot of good things business-wise. And I coach kickers and punters. I did it for a long time when I was out in Scottsdale, Arizona, and now I'm up doing the same thing here in New York. I just most recently I've been working with 2 kids since they were probably 15, and they are now, one of them kicks for the Packers, coincidentally, this weekend's opponent, and another guy just got released by the Cincinnati Bengals in training camp. So very, very excited to watch kids grow from 15 into the NFL. It's a pretty cool thing, and it keeps me close to the game and try to, you know, as they say, you give back.
Do you still keep up with the Colts? I mean, do you still follow what the Colts are doing, or because you spent a lot of time here, right? I mean, 98 to 05. We'll go back in a second and kind of go through how that all came to be. But do you still hold the Colts in a close regard to you?
I don't know how to answer that. I'm in Bills area, so I think I'm a Bills fan just by the fact that it's Bills Mafia where I live, so I've kind of adapted that. I've always been a Josh Allen fan since even before he came into the league. I thought he was going to be one of the best guys that were drafted at the time. I'm an NFL fan more than anything. You know, you're right. I have a horseshoe tattoo on my shoulder, so you know I'm always going to be a Colt for life. I left as the all-time leading scorer in Colts history, so certainly the Colts and I have a relationship. Not always good, you know, but there's people in the organization that were there at the time that aren't there now. So, you know, it's certainly better than it probably has been in the past. I'll say that.
Let's go back to, you know, you were such a prolific kicker in the Canadian Football League when you were signed. And I remember, Mike, when you were signed, you were in a difficult position because when the Colts signed you, Kerry Blanchard was a popular kicker and he had played well. And then you come in, and I think a lot of people were unfamiliar with you. It didn't take long for people to figure out, okay, that was a pretty good move because you had, at one point, one of the most prolific seasons in NFL history as a Colt. How did it all come together that you became a Colt?
Well, it's crazy that, when they signed me in Indy, as you mentioned, Blanchard was just in the Pro Bowl the year before, and Gardocki was also the Pro Bowler the year before. And when I signed there, they said, listen, you can compete for both punting and kicking, and whichever one you beat out, that's what you beat out. So, I had 2 good seasons in the Canadian Football League. Doug Flutie was my holder. I went 9 for 9 in 2 Grey Cups, which is the Super Bowl of Canada. Ended up being the Canadian MVP. And I had 8 workouts in the NFL coming out of there, and the Packers wanted to sign me as a punter, and then the Colts said, listen, you can come and compete for both. So it just Indy became the best opportunity for me at the time. And, like you mentioned, I came into a very difficult situation. Not only were they both Pro Bowlers, but they were very close friends. They've been very successful in Indy, and here I am, the third wheel, for lack of a better term, to where you're just, even during training camp, you're standing there and they're boys and I'm new to the scene. So it wasn't the easiest situation, but at the end of the day, it's a business and you're there to make kicks. And I think I either went 3 for 3 or 4 for 4 in preseason. And I think part of it was the Poley and Mora era. They wanted to put their own stamp on things, and anybody that was there prior to those guys, I think, became on the chopping block just because, in this business, you want to start fresh and bring in who you think is going to be best for the organization. And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time more than anything.
Was there a particular player or teammate? Mike Vanderjagt is our guest. Is there a particular teammate that you can look back on in the early years and think, you know what, that guy really did kind of do what he could to make me feel welcome? Or was it just once you started hitting kicks, then obviously it took care of itself?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I have a bit of a swagger, so I think, guys that look at kickers usually are like, they're just kickers, but I carry myself in a little bit of a different way. So I think I'll say real players kind of gravitated towards me as time went on. Obviously, if you make kicks, that's good too, but Jeff Harrod was always great to me. Meadows and Dilger, those kind of veteran guys, they were friends with Chris and Kerry, but, they certainly didn't make me feel like an outsider.
Do you still have a swagger?
Yeah, I think I do. I don't think it's going anywhere. It's just kind of it's in my DNA.
Now, what about the puka shell necklaces? Do you still wear those?
The what?
Yeah, I just remember. I don't know why I remember this. I remember, I think camp or something. You always had like a white. I don't know, like a shell necklace
shell
type
things.
Deal.
Oh
yeah.
My God! Listen, I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, but I don't recall that. But now that you think about it, I think I do recall a newspaper article where I was at training camp, and I think I had it on. So I'll give you props for that. I don't know whether I should be concerned that you remember that about me or let it roll. But
That's
anyway,
I have, my memory is at times it's a curse. I'm not going to lie to you, and then at times it helps me out. But in that case, maybe it's a curse. Mike Vanderjagt, our guest. Mike, let's go back to the kick against Pittsburgh, for example.
Yes.
The reality is this. The reality is that the reason that was a story at the time is because you had been so prolific. And you look at the kicks that you hit in Denver and the snow and some of them that you hit. So maybe you were victim to your own success in that situation because it was a fait accompli when the Colts were getting ready to set up for a kick that Vanderjagt was going to hit it. So does it still haunt you?
Oh, absolutely not. It does not still haunt me. I think crazy stat is that, if you take the 8 years that I was in Indy, if you take my percentage and you put it against the 8 Pro Bowlers from the AFC during my stint there, I have a better percentage. So I literally could have been a Pro Bowler every year I was in Indy. Like I said earlier, I missed a total of 2 kicks that year. As a field goal kicker, you certainly can't make them all. And, I certainly tried. To be honest, my technique and my form the entire 2005 season was a mess. I couldn't make kicks in pregame. I couldn't make kicks in practice. I had no idea what I was doing. I would get into games and I would make kicks and I would have no idea how I made them. I think I went 4 for 4 in a Jacksonville game on the road, and I was presented a game ball, and I'm thinking to myself, how on earth am I getting a game ball when I have no idea? It's just like a golfer who just loses his form. Even when I signed in Dallas, I thought to myself, if they had worked me out before I signed there, they never would have signed me. I couldn't figure it out. So, and it wasn't about the Pittsburgh kick. It just became, I lost my swing, and I couldn't figure it out. So, normally I have that swagger, and when I walked onto the field in Pittsburgh, it's just kind of hit and hope. And it went so far right because you're just standing over the ball thinking, okay, how do I get this ball into those uprights? And it just became, I don't want to say unmakeable because obviously I had a successful season, but it wasn't the regular Mike Vanderjagt going out there for that Pittsburgh kick for sure.
And I appreciate the candor, Mike. I think people would be stunned by it because, you had the appearance of such a confidence, which is, as a kicker, you have to have, right? So were you battling that internally, almost like, look, man, I've got to walk the walk here, but man, because I would imagine, like you said in golf, it becomes mental, right?
100%. I absolutely, I always wanted the 53 guys on the sidelines to think to themselves, listen, Vanderjagt's got this, we're good. Because now that I've got them convinced, it's a lot better than me walking on the field and all of them thinking, oh God, this guy's not going to make it. And then it just becomes an internal battle, like you said. So if you've got that outward swagger, the last thing you have to worry about is anybody doubting you. And when people have confidence in what you're doing, you're going to have confidence in yourself. And at the end of the day, you're going to be more successful, in my opinion. When I teach kickers and punters, they could be 14 years old and never kicked the ball before. And I'll say, hey, listen, are you going to make this next one? And they're going to go, well, I hope so. I'll be like, okay, wrong answer. They're going to go, yeah, of course I am. I was like, okay, there you go. So, you just want to develop the mentality that it's going to go in no matter what.
So when Nick Harper gets tripped up by Roethlisberger and they're setting up and Vanderjagt's setting up for the field goal, if I would have walked out on the field right then and said to you, okay, what's going to happen here? What would you?
I would have said I have no idea. Let's hope it goes in. It really was a situation of just a lack of confidence, a lack of even knowledge of what the heck I was supposed to do to make this ball go in. And it was, it was a step from 50. It wasn't like it was 32 or it was a long way out. And I don't know. I just wasn't confident in what I was doing at that point in my career.
One of my favorite statistics for Mike Vanderjagt. Mike Vanderjagt is our guest, and I appreciate the time, Mike. It was one of my favorite stories, and again, my memory can be a curse, and then at times it can trip me up. I thought I read somewhere that you won the Grey Cup in Canada, and then you went out and you lost it. Now, is that correct?
Well, technically, I think it was taken from me, but I always joke that I played in 2 Grey Cups. I won 2 and lost 1, and people are like, well, wait a minute. How on earth have you won 2 and lost 1 when you only played in 2? But, yeah, I took it out. Every player can kind of sign it out for the weekend, so I signed it out. I went to a bar, restaurant at night. The place was packed, and, people were taking pictures with it. I was kind of socializing, letting it sit there and take pictures. And at the end of the night, you go to pick it up and leave with it, and it's gone. So it wasn't the greatest feeling in the world. It was a bit of a problem, but the police actually got a phone call later that night from a girl who says, I just got home from being out, and I've got the Grey Cup in my kitchen.
and now
we found it pretty quickly.
So the question is, did she know how she ended up with the Grey Cup?
No. 2 guy friends of hers apparently brought it and put it in her kitchen. So it was a couple of college kids apparently in Oakville, which is my hometown, and that's how it happened.
You can kind of appreciate it, right, in hindsight, because it all ended out okay?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, God bless them. It was a sweet move on their part, and I'm sure they still high-five each other today about it.
The conversation with Mike Vanderjagt continues in just a few minutes, including now that we got the part of, as he said at the beginning, look, you want to talk to me about the Pittsburgh kick? Okay, let's do that. We did do that. Of course, the other incident that I think many people still remember about Mike Vanderjagt, yes, there were a lot of big kicks. There also was the verbal exchange that I had mentioned earlier with Peyton Manning. Mike Vanderjagt did an interview in Toronto after the Colts had been ousted in the playoffs where he questioned the leadership or the overall fire of Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning fired back during the Pro Bowl by calling him, of course, the famous idiot kicker that got liquored up and ran his mouth. How did the two of them resolve, and what was the situation when they saw each other after that? Mike Vanderjagt will explain that and more on the other side. More with the former Colt kicker on this 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
Vanderjagt to win it in overtime from 51. He's got it. He made it! Yeah! Mike Vanderjagt with a 51-yarder to win it.
Mike Vanderjagt is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line on this former Colt Friday. And, you know, Mike, look, you had great moments.
We can't call it that.
That's right. That's right. The legal folks are online too, right?
Exactly.
Hey, look, I know people, when your name comes up, and I hate to go there, but I will, I guess. You're linked to Peyton Manning. I mean, that's just the reality. And I was covering the Pro Bowl that year when you had done the interview with Canadian television and questioned Peyton Manning's, I guess late game mentality or whatever it may be. It was a long time ago, I realized. But then the comments from Manning come out. And I think people forget you guys played together for a long time after that. In retrospect, people think, well, that was the end. And it wasn't. How did that all work itself out, and what's your relationship with Peyton Manning?
It's crazy that I retired as the most accurate kicker in the history of the NFL in a Colts uniform, and you want to talk about the two things that I would really rather not talk about. But anyway, the Pittsburgh kick and the Manning fiasco. So I'm just playing with you. It's not a big deal. So I answered a question, and obviously in hindsight, actually, I emailed Peyton. It might have been a year ago, and I was just like, listen, man, as I raise my son, I try to raise him to live without regrets. And I said, one of the biggest regrets I had is, how I handled the interview in Toronto. And he's like, listen, man, I value your friendship. It was a long time ago, and, we've well moved past it, bro. And, all the best. So it was a cool response from him. We still talk. I probably talked to him maybe a month ago. We have the same birthday. I was out on a cruise one year, and I looked down at my phone, and Peyton Manning's wishing me happy birthday. So we are linked more than just because we were a couple of dumbasses on an off season. But when I went back to Indy for the first time, Peyton and I happened to be walking into the weight room together, and I was just like, dude, what were you thinking? And he was like, dude, what was I thinking? What were you thinking? I was like, yeah, you're right. So, and you're right. We played 4 more years together. So, the media is what the media is. And, they created something and made it last a lot longer than it ever needed to. Him and I squashed it almost immediately. But, from the outside world, much like a lot of things in life, people think they have an opinion and they know what's what, and they really don't.
Mike, I think a lot of people in Indianapolis, it certainly is well known. I mean, at least to me it was, the stat that you were the most accurate kicker in the history of the NFL. I think people took pride in that. And I think if you came back, you would be well received for that fact. And I think, the kicks in Denver, like I mentioned, there were a lot of kicks that you hit. But for those that don't remember, I think it was a Monday night game in Denver. I know because I'm working at Channel 6, and we had like the highlight package done for the post-game show. And then you come out in a snowstorm, hit, and I'm going to say a 53-yarder maybe it was, to force overtime, and then in overtime you end it with another 50-plus kick. It was unbelievable. And people remember that stuff. Have you been back to Indy, or do you consider your relationship fractured with Indy?
I personally think it's fractured. People tell me all the time, listen, everybody in Indy loves you. I don't know what you're thinking. You've done a lot of great things for the town, but, from a personal standpoint, I just feel like, I don't know, the Pittsburgh kick, just because it was the last kick that I was there, is what anybody ever thinks about. So, but I actually was in Indy in April. I met up with Hunter Smith and Justin Snow, who are 2 of my closest friends, when I was there, and we actually reenacted a picture of ourselves on the sidelines. We reenacted it, 20 plus years later, and it was pretty cool. And we ended up talking for hours, and we closed the restaurant, and we looked around, and there was nobody there. So it was a great evening. And I think it was the Keystone area somewhere. And, so that's really the only time I had been back since 2006. I just haven't needed to come back. I don't live there. I don't have any ties to there other than the Colts. So, I have been to a couple of Colts games in Buffalo in preseason. I got sideline passes. David Thornton hooked me up, and I said hi to a lot of guys that are still there, equipment guys and such. So, I'm not afraid of Indy or, it just happens that I just haven't been back. But, being on the sidelines of a Colts game in Buffalo last year and the year before was a cool time, and being able to catch up with people you hadn't seen in a while.
It just dawned on me, if a guy's Canadian, it's only fitting that his two best friends are a hunter and a snow, right? I mean, that
that's pretty good, actually.
Fits,
I never
right?
thought about that.
I mean, the Indianapolis Indians got a first baseman now whose last name is Beer. I guess that also Canadians would like that, but,
For sure, yeah.
You guys closed down the restaurant and the Grey Cup was nowhere to be found. It's all good, right? Everything works out.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, lastly, Mike, I know that, when you were here, I believe, it was during your time as a Colt, I believe, that you became a father to your son, who I think now is a young man. Is he a kicker? He obviously doesn't live in the Indy area, correct?
He does not. He's been in Arizona, but he just now moved with me up in New York. But he's becoming eligible for the Canadian Football League draft in this spring. So he's a quarterback. He was on scholarship at a Division II school in Ohio, University of Findlay. And then I've taught him how to kick and punt, but everybody who asks me, "Oh, is your son a kicker?" I'm like, hell no, he's not a kicker. The last thing I want him to be is a kicker. Basically, just because of the point you've done here is you make them all, and they only want to talk about the one you missed. So, but he does kick and punt, and he's primarily a quarterback, so he'll go up there and do what he has to do. So he's 25 already, and he was certainly raised as an early child in Indianapolis.
Lastly, Mike, what's your proudest moment? I mean, when you think about your time in the league as a player, as a dad, maybe, what is the thing that you would like for people when they think of Mike Vanderjagt, they should think of this?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think I answered every question ever. I always was open to the media. I signed every autograph, whether I was eating dinner and somebody stuck a phone in my face saying, "Hey, will you just say hi to my son?" I never said no to anything. I signed every autograph as I left the stadium. I did every interview. I went to the Indianapolis Children's Hospital and visited with kids. I had a foundation that helped kids. I did everything right except I answered a question wrong. That's the only real thing that I did in Indianapolis that I regret. But I had the greatest season a kicker could ever have. I made every kick possible, regular season and postseason. I did a lot of good things in Indianapolis. Obviously, I was married there, and my son was raised there. And 99% of everything I did in Indy was great, except for one or two, which makes it kind of tainted. But I really don't think it should be. So I guess other than that, the Denver kick was a Sunday night, and it was 54, not 53, so I'll correct you on that.
No way. The second one, though, I said 56. Now, and we'll stick with 56,
you didn't say
right?
56. You said 50 plus.
Sorry, I think but was it 56?
It was 51.
Okay, so here's
54 to tie, 51 to win, and it was Sunday night, and it was snowing. And what's crazy about that night is that in the morning we had breakfast, and I was standing in line next to Tony Dungy, and they were serving Canadian bacon, and Tony looks down at me, he goes, "Hey, look, Canadian bacon, today's your day." And I was like, "Well, not only that, Coach, today is Grey Cup Sunday." So it was meant to be, I guess.
It's a lot of fun times, Mike, for certain. And listen, I'm sincere when I say this. I think, and I get it, and I apologize for the fact that it was the two things I asked about. It's the two things that people know about, but at the same time, the good is all there as well. And Eddie will back me up on this, man. Every time your name has come up, I have mentioned exactly that fact. You answered every single question. And in this interview, you hit every single kick. And it is greatly appreciated. And I know you got better things to do. Although, if you're sitting looking out over Lake Ontario, talking to some idiot in Indianapolis ain't all bad, right?
No, it's been fine. I've enjoyed it, actually.
Mike, I appreciate it. We certainly wish you the best, both in business and in helping out young kickers and your son as well. And I guess we'll say go Bills. I love Josh Allen at Wyoming, and he's playing well in Buffalo. And I certainly hope you enjoy your time up there.
Appreciate it, Jay. Good talking to you, brother.
Mike Vanderjagt, the former Colt, and, of course, again, there's a lot to unpack there. I was stunned, frankly, and maybe it's just me. I don't know. I would love your reaction to it. I was surprised at the candor of the fact that of all athletes that I've covered, of all athletes that I think people in Indianapolis have watched, Reggie Miller, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, certainly those guys are on a different level in terms of their careers in Indianapolis, the longevity, everything else. But in terms of overall confidence, and as he mentioned it, swagger that a guy had, for him to admit that Pittsburgh kick, he had no idea whether or not, I believe he said you're just looking over the ball and it's just hit and hope. The thought amongst everybody inside the RCA Dome was, this is the most automatic of automatics. It was Reggie Miller at the free throw line. It was Steve Alford at the free throw line. It was Peyton Manning, on a 4th and goal with an open receiver. It was an automatic. And to find out that he didn't feel that way was surprising to me. I also don't know that he ever has gone into depth with, even though he and Manning played together for a number of years after that incident, just talking about the fact that even to this day, a year ago, reaching out to Peyton Manning. I thought it was a great conversation on his behalf, not mine, and it was much appreciated. I'd love to know what you folks think. And also, yesterday somebody said to me, Eddie, remember we got a tweet from somebody that said, how about some phone calls? And I said, you know what? It is an interactive show, right?
That is correct.
And it's a Transparency Friday. Should we do some phone calls next, Eddie?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, so we'll 239-1070 is the telephone number. I'd love to know what you think about the conversation with Mike Vanderjagt and just maybe your thoughts about the Green Bay game as well. That and later in the 1 o'clock hour, Kyle Nidenrip going to join us, and we lost an indie sports icon overnight, and it might be one whose name you're not familiar. I'll let you know about that when we return here on a Friday. Transparency Friday, as I'm calling it, 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Hour number 2 underway. Jake Query along with Eddie Garrison. Jimmy Cook, by the way, going to be back next week. A reminder, he is out, of course, on paternity leave with his young son arriving a few weeks ago and taking a couple of weeks off. Very well deserved. Jimmy will be back with us coming up, not this coming week, but the week after that. Very understandable in terms of his taking time off. So Eddie and I are manning things, if you will. And like I said, it's a Transparency Friday. I thought Vanderjagt was very transparent. Eddie, anything you need to get off your chest, by the way?
No, we're good. We're all good right now, Jake.
Nothing at all?
Nothing at all. Nothing.
Okay.
Is there something you need me to get off my chest, Jake? Is there something I need to say?
That's the clean living Eddie Garrison, apparently, right, on this Transparency Friday. Indiana getting set for UCLA in Big Ten action. How strange does that sound? Of course, Purdue, Notre Dame upcoming as well. One guy that I know is going to be fired up over that Indiana game is on hold right now, but I wanted to get reaction from people about the interview with Mike Vanderjagt or your thoughts on the Colts and Packers, because we still don't know whether or not it's Jordan Love that Indianapolis will face. That certainly, one would assume, is going to be a factor in how well the Colts fare up in Green Bay. But let's go to the phone lines at 239-1070. I would love to hear from you folks. Yesterday, the last couple of days, we haven't taken a lot of calls, so people wanted to talk about the Colts or perhaps Vanderjagt. What I most want to know is this, and this is why I was hoping people would call in at 239-1070. It is not my job to, nor is it not necessarily my desire to impact or influence the way that you fans of Indianapolis think of players, but rather to simply present things and then let let me know how you feel. I'm curious if listening to Mike Vanderjagt, who's a pretty polarizing guy, changed at all your opinion of Mike Vanderjagt, and whether or not, like when I mentioned that Vanderjagt was going to be joining us, and one of the first comments I got was, "Boo that guy, he cost us a Super Bowl." And I get the narrative. Clearly he does as well, or the sentiment. But in any way, shape, or form, did that change that perspective in hearing for the first time kind of the human side of it? Because the vulnerability of, look, I was completely lost on my kick. I don't even know why Dallas signed me. I mean, that was just such a side of him I think we hadn't seen before. Chris joins us on the show. Chris, how are you?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on. Love the interview. That was awesome. Listening to it between iHeartRadio and the dial going in and out gas station and picking up lunch. But comment on the interview. I thought he was a little defensive about his reputation, but I love that he was willing to own it. But I'm surprised he has that much resentment, and you could feel it a little bit. I'm not sure if you felt that as well.
Yeah, I think, Chris, and I probably should have, I'll be honest with you, in listening back to it, when he said, and I'll be honest, it's Transparency Friday, right, Chris? Anything you want to get off your chest, by the way, on Transparency Friday?
Well, I was going to comment about Ballard after, so we can get there.
Okay, good. Well, because we'll talk about that, because I want to get to that as well. So bear with me here on this, because Ballard is a good segue off of what I'm going to say here. It's interesting when you do an interview. It's like anything else. You're involved in a conversation, and you never know where the interview is going to go. So you can have your bullet points of what you want to discuss, but then something might be mentioned, and you have to determine whether or not to pursue that or not. And when he said there are people that were with the organization then that are no longer with the organization, so my relationship's probably not as icy, I'm paraphrasing. I knew, just because I covered the team in that era, I was under the very, very strong assumption, I should say, he was talking about Bill Polian. I believe that his relationship with Bill Polian after he went on Letterman and after he had kind of made, kind of jokes about the kick against Pittsburgh, it did not settle well with the Colts brass. And he stayed here. Don't get me wrong. They continued to use him, and he was a very good kicker for them. But I think in the end, that relationship was very soured. And I wanted to pursue or confirm in the moment of the interview that that's what he was talking about. But there were other areas that I wanted to get to with him, and I didn't want to give him the out of ending the interview because suddenly like it became sour. So I kind of let that one slide so that we could get back more into like the Peyton Manning stuff and the kick. And so for that, I apologize because I should have dug deeper on that. And I erred in that regard, but that was the reasoning why. But to answer your point there, I think he was talking about Bill Polian and just the fact that that was the guy that released him. And so, that's where that stands. Now, having said that, obviously now the general manager of the Colts is Chris Ballard. Your thoughts on him?
And only thing I didn't say, awesome job with that. By the way, I felt that in the interview, and I think you would have lost him too, which is how he teed up that whole combo. But actually, we'll switch to I think the Ring of Honor. That's what I was putting in the chat for you guys too. I think there's some heartburn about that. He's not in that Ring of Honor. But moving on to Ballard. So all the secondary debate for the last month and a half, I've been blowing up your guys' YouTube chat with that as well. And I think we're going to see the real test right now, $13 million in cap space. You hinted at it a couple weeks ago, and whether this is an Irsay holding back a little bit of the money or Ballard just being stubborn. And I think if the Colts pick up a couple wins and secondary looks weak, we're going to have that answer real soon because there has to be someone that could trade or go buy with that much cap space come week 4 or 5 and how teams are shaping out, and we'll see what it really is. But I tend
Chris,
to be
I appreciate it.
a Ballard defender. So
you what's that?
I tend to be a Ballard defender. It made sense to me to sit on the secondary if you have a plan B once the season starts. So
I think, Chris, you probably heard me talk about this, and it sounds like you'll agree with me in this area. In terms of the defensive backs with Ballard, to me, the thing that I keep going back to is when he keeps saying – they got to play. We don't know. You kind of don't know what you have until they play, so you might as well, if this year is about the development of Anthony Richardson, then it may as well be about the development of your defensive backs as well, and you're kind of assessing and inventorying both of them and then figuring out where you're going to go from there. And if you go out and say, look, we think we have a really good roster and we're ready to make a push, the Colts, Chris, and I appreciate the phone call, Chris, the Colts I go back to this. Chris Ballard wasn't here for this, but Jim Irsay was. And that is that I think Jim Irsay knows that the Colts erred with Andrew Luck where they accelerated the timeline. And I know I say that a lot. But I really do think that when they had Andrew Luck and they had success early, they then went out and they had young players. Coby Fleener was a young player, right? Andrew Luck was obviously still a young player. At the time, Trent Richardson, the running back that they had, was a young player. They thought that's who they were going to build with, if you will. They thought Dante Moncrief was going to be a good young player for them. And they got rid of all their vets, and they had these young players, and they had success early. So then, instead of letting it kind of organically grow, they went out and they got Frank Gore, and they got Andre Johnson, and they signed Gosder Sherrills, and they got guys that were kind of in the back end of their career, and it was boom or bust, and it went bust. And so then your timelines are off, and you pushed in too aggressively too early. And I do think that Chris Ballard probably looked at that and learned from what the Colts did there. And then secondly, that Jim Irsay probably, as much as Irsay at the time, Griggs is wheeling and dealing, and he was all in on it. But the reality is that I think Irsay probably said, let's take this a little bit slower because we don't know what we have yet in Richardson or when he is going to be full throttle. So the defensive backfield is one. There really wasn't, and I know that fans and media and all of us would like for them to immediately push in so that they are, deep playoff contender ready right now because in other areas it looks like they could be. But the reality is that you are still at the engine itself still is under 10,000 miles. So you might as well make sure that the rest of the car is going to be humming at the same time. I mean, that's a long-winded and circuitous way of saying it. But now in terms of the cap, Chris, and you're right, and I appreciate that you picked up on that and that clearly you've listened to the show before because I do have people that tell me, I'm not saying it's factual, but I've had people that would probably know or that are pretty close tell me that it's not that Irsay is necessarily strong-arming Ballard, but he is giving him a pretty definitive Colts cap as opposed to the NFL salary cap of this is where I want it to be for this year. And maybe it's because Jim Irsay is thinking of keeping money available for bigger deals down the road or whatever it might be. But I do think that when we look at – I'll simply say it this way. When we look at or assess or analyze or scrutinize or question the cap space that Chris Ballard has, I think that it is entirely possible that in reality that cap space is different than the actual hard number that the NFL puts out there, and that he may have to come in underneath that number. Don't know that factually, but that certainly, that thought I don't think can be totally dismissed. Turnbuckle Bill on the show. TB, what's up?
Hey, guys.
You sound down, Bill.
Hello? Oh, I'm not down. Oh, man, I am not down at all. As a matter of fact, this is called Patronizing Friday, and I want to tell you that I thought that the interview with Vanderjagt, and it made me think, did you once interview Charles Manson also? Did you do that? You did that, right?
Now, Bill. Now, you're not – I have a letter from Charles Manson. There is
okay.
absolutely, obviously, zero connection between Manson and Vanderjagt other than they both lived in Indianapolis at one time.
No, I didn't. Well, that's interesting you went that way with it, but that wasn't my point. I was saying that I thought maybe you'd interviewed him, but if you wrote him too, I mean, how intimidating can somebody be? You know, when you're –
Well, it's a good point. Now, that's a good point. I wrote Manson a letter, Bill. Manson lived in Indianapolis when he was a kid. I've told this story many times, but he lived in Indy as a kid. I wrote him a letter and said, how much of your time in Indianapolis contributed to the adult you became? And he wrote me back a very long letter chronicling his time in Indianapolis. That would be the extent of my quote-unquote interview with Charles Manson.
Okay. All right. And I thought that the interview with Vanderjagt, and then for people from a historical standpoint, the Steelers were just running all over the Colts with Jerome Bettis was hammering them like his name was Joe Mixon. I mean, that's what was happening that day. And if Gary Brackett doesn't stick his helmet into Bettis and cause that fumble on the 5-yard line when Pittsburgh was getting ready to go in and score again, and Nick Harper could not elude the tackle from Ben Roethlisberger, that was such a big thing. So if I'm going to blame anybody for us not going to the Super Bowl this year, it's Nick Harper's wife.
That's right. No, you're right, because that was – I know that's an almost flippant narrative, but the reality is that he had been stabbed in the thigh earlier that week, and, you know, there are people that believe that that's why he could not break away in full speed, and then Roethlisberger was able to trip him up. He couldn't score the touchdown, and we know what happened from there.
Yeah, and Roethlisberger didn't make like your classic tackle. I mean, he was laying down. He was on his back.
Oh, it's a shoestring tackle, yeah.
It really was. So Mike Vanderjagt, I thought that my opinion of you is elevated because of that interview, and quite frankly, I think that's one for the archives. That is what, if I was a younger man, I'd say that's a resume builder, Jake. So you danced through that interview to the extent where for the rest of the day, I'm going to refer to you as Jake Barishnikov.
Well, thank you, Bill. Now, here's the thing, and I appreciate the words. I know this, though, Bill. I know that one thing that you are the most passionate about is you love you some IU football, and the Hoosiers are back in the Rose Bowl, baby. I want your thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, I had said since the 80s and everything that I just hope that I would be able to stay alive to see IU get back to the Rose Bowl. Now, I think I know this doesn't necessarily fulfill that, but I'll take it at this point anyway. But I think what is going to be interesting to see is you've got a lot of guys because of the transfer portal that came up from a smaller university, even though they're tight-knit and they're able to perform, and they're going to play in the Rose Bowl. I mean, is that not an incentive for recruiting players to come to your program if they're going to have probably their only chance to play in the Rose Bowl? I think that's the one thing about this game that is so interesting to me, and I'm going to be very, very attentive to how the rest of the country kind of views IU after this. I think that this is a program watershed moment, for lack of a better term. This is what I've been waiting for. So I need a ruling for the judges. If I make a statement 40 years ago saying I just want to stay alive until IU gets to the Rose Bowl, does this count? And fulfill that.
All right, Bill, that's the question of the day. But here's the thing. And Bill Benner's in this same category. Bill Benner, who is like the longest-suffering Indiana football fan of all time, and he sent a picture yesterday of a California sunset, and he's like, I am here to see the Hoosiers in the Rose Bowl. Don Fisher, who has called a gabillion games of Indiana football and said, he's like, look, I'm going to live with it that Indiana's in the Rose Bowl. Bill, you have been loyal to Indiana. You have backed Indiana for as long as I have been doing sports talk radio in Indianapolis. You have called in to pump up Indiana when like no one else did, when they were 1-8 and they're going into Maryland. You're like, no, I'm telling you, it turns around now. So yes, I hereby am officially declaring for you, Turnbuckle Bill, that it is within your boundary of legality on this transparent Friday to go ahead and declare that the Hoosiers are in the Rose Bowl. So soak it up and enjoy it. Now, the question is, Eddie, you're the youngest guy of the trio here involved in this conversation. Does Indiana go back to the Rose Bowl in the next 40 years the legitimate fashion, Eddie Garrison?
Ooh. I don't think so. I do not think so. I wish I could be optimistic about that, Jake, but I love Curt Cignetti, but I don't know if the dollars are there for Indiana football to get to that level.
I think Curt Cignetti likes Curt Cignetti too, right? Which is kind of what I like about him. It's just the swagger aspect of it. UCLA is down. This is a chance for Indiana, I think. We're going to find out a lot about both teams here. And, I mean, it's not like we need or care to know a lot about UCLA. But from the Indiana standpoint, it's hard to know. Indiana looked prolific against Western Illinois. But that's literally the worst college football program in America, and the only reason they were on the schedule is because when Indiana opted out of the Louisville, deal, they had to have somebody on the schedule, so Western Illinois was available, and that's who they went with. But Western Illinois is terrible, and they haven't won in 2 years, and there's a reason that Indiana goes out and scores 77 on them. Now, don't get me wrong, Alabama would have scored 77. UCLA would have scored, maybe 57. Who knows, right? I mean, you have to be clicking just no matter who you're playing against to score at that rate.
Yeah.
But we don't know a lot about Indiana. And this is going to tell us, but UCLA also, I still think of UCLA as, because it's UCLA and they play in the Rose Bowl and, for years they were an elite program, but they haven't been for 20 years. And, they've undergone a coaching change. They're changing there. So the reality is, Eddie, this UCLA team, for Bill Benner and for Turnbuckle Bill, we'll call it the Rose Bowl. But, Eddie, I think you'll agree with me. This is not like our dad's UCLA, right? Although your dad's UCLA is my UCLA, but you get what I'm
saying. Yeah, that's a very good point that you make there. And I have a question for you, Jake, about UCLA.
Okay.
Where are they located?
That would be Los Angeles. Thank you. Just asked their head coach, Sean Foster, who got a little bit tongue-tied when he was doing media day. It's like, we're UCLA? We're from Los Angeles. Are there people that thought that they were actually from like University of California, Lower Alameda? Is that what they thought? Like they were from the Bay Area?
Maybe it's like a University of Central Louisiana. I have no idea.
That'd be cool too. Hey, let me tell you something. Or as I always call it, whenever a team is off and they're playing Idaho Lower East. Right?
Yeah.
Which would be idle. Now, Purdue Notre Dame is the other big one of the weekend. Again, a game where I think going into it, I still think Notre Dame's pretty darn good. I mean, I know that Northern Illinois game, the thing that was to me so curious was that Northern Illinois simply beat them in the trenches. And that's the area where I think Notre Dame has really made a concerted effort in the last decade to decade and a half to get athletes and to spread the field and have speed and those kinds of things. And yet they are known still. If you look, for example, in the Brian Kelly era, the area where Notre Dame was probably the best was in the trenches. I mean, in particular on the offensive line. I mean, their offensive line, when they got into the college football playoff, that was a huge part of it. Quentin Nelson and the whole group, right? And it is unusual to see Notre Dame getting pushed around, and in particular to getting pushed around by a non-Power 5 team. But the thing you have in Northern Illinois, and the reason why they were so emotional after that game, and the reason why, even if you're a fan of Notre Dame or whatever it may be, that you had to at least respect it, was Northern Illinois, when you are in that league, when you're in the MAC, or when you're in the MoVal in basketball, or you're in the A10 in basketball, or the Horizon League, these are good leagues with good players, but if you think back to the NCAA tournament when Oakland stuns the world, beats Kentucky, and then goes double overtime against North Carolina State, that's a huge moneymaker for the Horizon League, which is a good league and has good players. But as we talked about with Oakland's coach on this show that week, when he said, look, I've got a really good player, but I've got to make a run with him here because as soon as the tournament's over with, he's going into the portal and he's taking NIL money and he's going somewhere where we can't afford to pay him.
Yeah, I think his direct quote was, I can't pay him $250,000.
I think that was his direct, like right along those lines, right?
Yeah.
And I remember, Eddie, when he said it, like you, me, and Jimmy all kind of looked at each other like, whoa. But again, Transparency Friday. It would have worked on this program, right, today. But with Northern Illinois, I think one of the reasons they were so emotional after that game is the fact that they had, at least according to their coach, a group and a roster that had staved that temptation and those offerings elsewhere to band together as a group and say, we're a mature group and we're going to ride this out together and see what we can do. And in that Notre Dame game, in the trenches, I think what you saw was a group of players that maybe could have transferred and gone elsewhere, but they stuck it out where they were. And so that's why it was so emotional, because their efforts and their banding together paid off. So my point being, when it comes to Notre Dame, we can look at that and say they got beat by a lesser opponent, but it also was a mature group, and it was a group that had banded together. And sometimes in sports, maybe you can't win a whole season that way, but you can find moments that way. And Northern Illinois found their moment in that. And so you give a little bit of a pass to Notre Dame in that regard. But it's still a loss, and it's a bad loss because it's at home against a MAC team. But Notre Dame is in a good position here if they can win out going into the game against SC to finish things off, and their schedule is pretty favorable. They're still going to have a chance to get into the playoff because it's 12 teams now. But it starts this weekend for them, and they've got to be a Ted Lasso line here. They've got to be a goldfish.
That's right.
Notre Dame has to basically look at this game with Purdue and say, we're facing Purdue. We're not facing the ghosts of Northern Illinois. We're not facing the hangover of Northern Illinois and the worst spot in the history of football that we couldn't take advantage of when we got the ball back after Northern Illinois should have been able to run the clock out. We're not going against those things. But, Eddie, we don't know a lot about Purdue yet either. No. I mean, they've got good quarterbacking play so far, but it's a different animal when you're going against Notre Dame. And I love the Purdue-Notre Dame rivalry. It's one that has a lot of history to it. All you have to do is go into the office of our executive producer, Todd Meyer, that has programs from like the 60s of Purdue and Notre Dame playing.
You should see the Purdue Pete shirt he's wearing. It's actually pretty cool. It's a nice little shirt.
We don't tell anybody this, but I'm in Nashville today, so I can say this because he can't come in the studio and yell at me. Todd kind of looks like Purdue Pete. I'm not going to lie to you.
Okay.
I mean, he's built like him, right? He's kind of built like him. I'm just saying. Kyle Nedenrip, by the way, from the high school football slate of things, will join us on the other side. We'll find out the games of the night. We'll find out the teams that are hot, the teams that are not, and what he's got his eye on. That, and as I mentioned, the loss of an indie sports icon. I'll tell you who that is in just a couple of minutes as well. You're listening to 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Eddie Garrison bounces back, I should say, by playing some rush. Turns out the Colts are not in a rush to try to get Julian Blackmon back on the football field, rather opting for perhaps his health. Eddie, we have some breaking news to report, if you could. Eddie, I will let you do the honors in terms of the roll call of who is in and out for practice today for the Colts, which is a good indicator as to who might be available in Lambeau.
So post-practice today, Shane Steichen met with the media, and he shared that Julian Blackmon will be out on Sunday's game as he's dealing with a shoulder injury. DeForest Buckner has a chance to play. He said, quote, "We'll see when it comes to Josh Downs playing on Sunday." He did not give a statement about Kwity Paye from the likes of Twitter that I've been able to search so far. So it sounds like Kwity Paye should be suiting up on Sunday after practicing today. Now, he did not practice on Thursday or on Wednesday, but the fact that he was out there today in limited capacity usually trends for the right direction. And then Shane Steichen stated that Matt Gay will be kicking on Sunday. So after a 1-week absence, Matt Gay will be back on the field.
Okay, so that is where things stand with the Colts. Kevin Bowen going to join us 2 o'clock, and that will give us also a pretty good indication as Kevin's out there today to watch practice. Tonight, speaking of football, our next guest is going to be at Warren Central, and it's at Warren Central at Lawrence Central or Lawrence Central at Warren Central. I will let Kyle Neddenriep of the Indianapolis Star clarify exactly that for us. Kyle, how are you?
Hey, good, Jake. How are you doing?
I cannot complain. So you are tonight. This is the one that you will be watching. Is the Warriors and the Bears? It takes place where?
It's at Warren. Warren's going to be doing a reunion tonight of their '84 championship team and their 2004 championship team. So it should be a pretty fun evening. And I guess from an on-the-field standpoint, we'll see if they give up a point for the first time this year because they have not allowed a single point through their first 3 games.
And in terms of that, I guess from the other side of it, I mean, the defensive look, Warren Central traditionally we know is always, it's a football factory there. But how much of that is a kudos and a credit to Warren, and how much of that is based on the opposition Warren has seen to this point? Is this their biggest test?
Oh yeah, I mean, and that's a fair, I think, a fair assessment of that. I mean, that this will be, with Terry Walker at quarterback for LC, they've got a guy who can. Yeah, as Mike Kirshner said yesterday when I talked to him, he can not only throw, but he can make things happen with his feet. So, this will be their biggest test. They also have, several good running backs. One of the best tight ends in the state in Zy Davis, who's going to Wisconsin. So they've got a lot of offensive weapons on their side of the ball. And Warren, to this point this season, they've played a schedule I think you could say is not the best part of their schedule that they're going to see for sure. But they've handled the business like they've needed to. They played a Snyder team that was in the 5A finals last year and won it, and has since moved up to 6A. They played a Warsaw team that's mostly a running team, and they played a North Central team that can throw the ball and is obviously still building their program. But yeah, I mean, it hasn't been the best, but you got to beat who's in front of you, and they've done a great job of turning the ball, creating turnovers, creating havoc, creating sacks. And that defensive line is there's no two ways about it. They're just really, really good, and that helps a secondary and linebacker crew that's also very veteran. So I think the biggest thing for Warren is seems like their offense is getting better, but yeah, this will be their best test. And LC beat a really good Edwardsville, Illinois team last week, close to the St. Louis area there. That's traditionally a really strong program. So, they're coming off a good win too after 2 close losses to LN and Zionsville the first 2 weeks.
Kyle, you've seen Forrest Gump, obviously, right? I mean, everybody's seen Forrest Gump, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've seen it. I think it was in high school when that came out.
Do you remember Lieutenant Dan's 2 rules for Bubba and Forrest?
I should know that. I haven't seen the movie in a while, but
you never salute a lieutenant when you're out in the fields because then it tips off to the enemy which one's the guy that is the point man, right? And the other thing is you always make sure you have clean socks. Clean, dry socks, right? Now, I'm in Nashville this weekend for the IndyCar race, and it's supposed to in the little roster notes it said bring clean socks because it's supposed to rain here this weekend. No clean socks this weekend in Hamilton County because it's the mud sock rivalry, right? It's a good one, right? Fishers and HSE.
Oh yeah, that's always the fun. And I've covered that probably the last 2 or 3 years at least. And it's been an overtime game the last 2 years in the regular season. The crowd is phenomenal. I mean, it's always 8,000 people, and it's just a big student turnout for sure. The parking lots are packed long after the game's over. So. I'd say, I mean, from a standpoint of atmosphere and crowd and everything, that's always, arguably the best around. So, from an on-the-field standpoint, HSC to me is the better team this season. They're ranked fifth and 3-0 the first 3 weeks. That again, kind of like Warren, they've handled their business against pretty good competition, I would say. I mean, Carroll, North Central, and Avon the first 3 weeks. Fishers did lose. They're coming 2-1 after that loss to Pike in week 2, and then came back last week and rallied late to beat Noblesville in overtime. So, I do wonder about up front. It seems like HSC has the advantage from a size standpoint this year, but it's one of those games too where all these kids know each other. They all grew up either playing against each other, with each other in the youth programs. So much familiarity between those schools and those teams, and it creates a lot of a good rivalry. I mean, obviously, and it's going to be a fun game again tonight, I think, and we'll see if Fishers can get over the hump. They really, it's basically come down to 2 years ago. It was an extra point. A snap kind of got away from the holder, and they weren't able to kick the extra point. And then last year they ended up going for 2 in overtime, not getting it. So they've been right there on the doorstep. You can't ask for better games and atmosphere than they've had the last 2 years. And I'm sure it'll be close again tonight. It just always seems to go that way.
Kyle Neddenriep is our guest. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, of course, with the Indianapolis Star. Kyle, other game I wanted to touch on because it's one of those that at the beginning of the year you look at the schedule and you circle it and it jumps out at you, and now – I'm wondering if it still has the same oomph. Thought Ben Davis perhaps would be stronger at this point than they are, but Center Grove, Ben Davis, when you see those two names, both jump out at you. But hard to imagine another time where going into it in week 3, both would already have a loss. But CGBD, give me the preview.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to see this game too because excuse me, I do think it's going to be a great game, and I think Ben Davis getting a win last week over Pike, 38-14. They got one now, and can they do it this week? And honestly, last year in November, these two teams are graduate a lot, obviously on both sides, but it was an instant classic. It was 37-34 in overtime, and it went down to the wire. Ben Davis was able to win, and it was basically the state championship. It turned out to be, with Ben Davis beating Crown Point pretty handily the next week and ending Center Grove's 3-year run at Class 6A, which is pretty much unheard of. So I'm very curious to see, how this game turns out tonight. Center Grove got a really good win last week against Louisville Trinity on the road. They went down there and won. Trinity's the number 1 team in Kentucky. So if people kind of thought Center Grove was falling off, after their loss to Westfield in week 1, I would say maybe that had more to do with Westfield than it does to Center Grove. So, very curious to see how this game goes. There's some bigger tests ahead. I love this game still on the schedule, even though it's not a MIC game anymore. I hope they keep playing each other. It's been a good rivalry over the years. And this is really a beginning of a stretch for Ben Davis that we'll kind of find out more about the Giants because they've got, Warren next week, then LN, then Carmel. The next 4 weeks are just a murderer's row there for Ben Davis. So we'll find out a lot. I almost went to this game, to be honest with you, but wanted to see Warren Central for the first time. So I think it should be a great game. I don't know, I think Center Grove is maybe the pick, but yeah, it should be fantastic, and I'll look forward to seeing what happens on the west side tonight.
Good rivalry games tonight as well. Chittard and Cathedral among those. Trinity that you just mentioned is at Carmel. You have North Central looking for their first win at Lawrence North. They're going to shock the Wildcats tonight, Kyle. Just go ahead and write it now. North Central stuns the world tonight.
Yeah, well, honestly, North Central had been putting up a lot of numbers through the air, so that could be something. LN has too, man. They are their receiving core is about as good as it gets. So LN, something to watch, is kind of LN could be 5-0 if they can get wins here the next 2 weeks. and kind of set up a really interesting stretch run for that program. So, we'll see. We can look ahead, but obviously they can't. But I'll be curious to see, if they can get that win tonight. Then they have Tech next week, and then their stretch is BD, Warren, Center Grove the following 3 weeks. So that could set up pretty nice for that tough run there for the Wildcats.
And, of course, my team, the Blue Devils of Shortridge, Hammond Central, who is taking on Shortridge tonight. All of the games Kyle Neddenriep will have coverage of. He has predictions for all of them right now on the Indianapolis Star. He will be at Lawrence Central. Eddie Garrison, my understanding is for those that cannot be at that game via our radio station, they can still attend, correct?
Yeah, we will have Hamilton Southeastern and Fishers tonight at 7 o'clock with Brendan King
Hamilton
and Jim
Southeastern
Leisham.
Fisher, sorry.
Jim Leisure, yeah.
Okay, so Hamilton Southeastern Fishers here on 93.5 and 107.5. The fan Kyle Neddenriep will have the coverage for all of the games. Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line is where he is now. Kyle, we much appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week, all right?
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Jake.
Kyle Neddenriep joining us on the show here. Sorry about that, Eddie. So tonight's game is the Mud Sock game that's going to be on the fan, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay. If your socks are muddy, nothing better to clean them off than help out with a fan, right? Wash them off, dry them with the fan. I mentioned several times that – thank you, Eddie. Over the course, last night, and there are some people in Indianapolis that have left an imprint on sports in this town that you might not know about. You know their work. You don't know the name. We lost one last night. I'll tell you about it next. folks, the beauty of sport. The beauty of sport, as I have always said, is that sports are the one thing that unify the masses. You go to a Colts game or a Pacers game, a baseball game, and somebody hits a game-winning homer or makes a big tackle or hits a big shot, and people that have never known each other, don't know anything about one another, and maybe walk in totally separate walks of life, instantly jump up and hug and high-five, and they feel a bond and a camaraderie. And that's the beauty of sport. And sometimes sport does that as well when you get to know the individuals that are working behind the scenes. For example, boxing to me is a sport that it would be disingenuous for me to say that I'm an expert in it, but I've always had an appreciation for it because boxing is at its core just about the will and the discipline in sport of two people within one another. And it seems so odd to watch two people that are sitting there punching one another, but yet there's this incredible bond and respect between the two of them more often than not, that after the match, you know, the loser is holding up the arm of the winner or vice versa. And oftentimes boxing is a sport that is rooted in a coach or an advisor or an elder trying to give opportunity to a younger person to learn discipline, not just of sport, and learn camaraderie, not just in sport, but in life, to get out of a situation that might otherwise be adversary. And in Indianapolis, I have always felt that boxing is a sport that not only has had great boxers come out of it, Layman Brewster, Marvin Johnson. The Gold Gloves at the Tyndall Armory are a special, special event because beyond just the beauty of sport, you have the beauty of camaraderie, discipline, teamwork, even though it's an individual sport. Last night we lost a pillar of exactly that in the city of Indianapolis. When I was a kid, and many would argue that maybe I still am, but when I was a much younger and far less mature individual, I only knew really two things. I knew that I wanted to get into sport, and I knew that even though I didn't have any idea how to go about doing that from a broadcast standpoint, I had to act like I did. In that capacity, I very first met Fred Burns because his daughter Francie, who was a year younger than I at North Central, ran in the same social circle, and they came out to visit the University of Kansas when I was a freshman in college, and I met up with them, and that was the first time that I met Francie's dad, as I knew him then, and I simply knew that he was a giant within the sport of boxing in Indianapolis. And in that moment, there is no doubt that Fred Burns could tell that I was young and naive and falsely confident, but he treated me in that moment as if I was already involved in the broadcast of the world of sport. Fred Burns himself, and I knew at that time that he was a boxing promoter who had dealt with Don King and Muhammad Ali and some of the biggest, George Foreman. But what I didn't know was this. He lived in Chicago. He was a police officer there. When he met a woman that he decided that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with, which he did, and she was from Indianapolis and her parents lived here, so they moved to Indianapolis. And Fred Burns, the police officer from Chicago, was a boxing fan. And he thought, you know what, Indianapolis has some things going on for it, like the Indy 500, but it doesn't have boxing the way it should. So Fred Burns, the new resident of Indianapolis, thought if people are coming here for the Indy 500, they probably would enjoy boxing. So he decided to put on live boxing events during the Indianapolis 500 in the 70s, and it was a swing and a miss. Went down on a TKO, if you will, in that first match. But the beauty of boxing is you get back up, and that's exactly what Fred Burns did. And he got back up, and he started promoting the sport of boxing to give opportunity most and foremost to young people around Central Indiana and to give attention to a sport that at its core was about people learning confidence and learning about the camaraderie of sport. And that's what boxing does, and that's what Fred Burns did. Fred Burns became the biggest boxing promoter in Indiana. He brought George Foreman here to fight. He supported the Golden Gloves, which embodies everything that I just talked about. And he did anything that he could at any time to not only promote the sport of boxing and those that were aspiring to get into it, but also in that same capacity, making those that were getting involved with him feel like they were a part of things, even if they were just for the very first time putting on gloves, like myself when I first met him. I got to know him a little bit better, not intimately or in a regular basis, but I got to know him better as an adult when I was working at the cigar store where I met Keith Boggs, who was the director of the Indiana Gold Gloves. And Keith is one of those guys that when you meet, you know automatically right away, this guy's not only a good guy, but I feel like I've known him my whole life and has a heart of gold. And for that reason, I think he saw Fred Burns as a father figure because Fred was advising for the Golden Gloves in running his business of promoting boxing throughout Indianapolis and bringing ESPN Tuesday night fights that were coming to Indianapolis and getting contracts and working with the biggest and the best as part of F&F Burns Boxing. F&F because his wife's name was Freda, and he always joked about the fact that it was easy to buy towels because it's Fred and Freda, F&F Boxing, for he and his wife, the woman that brought him to Indianapolis and brought this great sport for so many of us right here in central Indiana. But Fred Burns would put together with Keith a lunch that would take place with a bunch of boxing guys. Sugar Ray Seals, the Olympic gold medalist that lived in Indianapolis after moving here himself because of a woman that he'd met after living in the state of Washington, and would wear his gold medal for anybody to come up and feel that little piece of greatness. Ray was one of those that was always at the lunch, and Keith was at the lunch. And it was just a bunch of guys that sat around and basically told old stories. And quite frankly, oftentimes the same stories that you heard the last time you were at the lunch. But everybody loved it. And they loved it because of the heart of gold of these guys, including Keith, who you could just see looked up to Fred in such a way because Keith was the guy making sure boxing was available to young people, and Fred is the guy that blazed the path to make sure that boxing was available for Keith and everybody else. He would have turned 85 tomorrow, but Fred Burns passed away last night at the age of 84. He leaves behind a legacy of guys like Keith, and my heart goes out to Keith because he's got a heart of gold, and I know what a loss it is for him. But for the beautiful sport of boxing and for the people in the city of Indianapolis who have enjoyed boxing, who have seen the commercials or the characters and all of those that go with this sport in Indianapolis, they owe a tremendous amount of gratitude to Fred Burns because he believed in those that he worked with. And he believed in this city, even though he wasn't from here, and made it part of the sports culture in terms of the boxing, ESPN coming here, and different fighters that would come here to fight. His two daughters, Francie, who I'd mentioned and lives in Hollywood, and then his daughter, Gia Burns, who is a very well-noted radio personality throughout Indianapolis and has been really good to me and used to routinely play for me, Chuck It Feels So Good by, I can't remember the guy's name. Chuck, Eddie, look it up. Feels So Good. What's his, Chuck Mangione? I think, anyway, regardless, I used to call in all the time to Gia and make the request when she used to do jazz at night, and she would play it for me, I think probably out of pity, but because she knew that I knew her dad. But my condolences to them, to the boxing community, to Keith in particular, but to the city of Indianapolis, and to Fred Burns, I simply say, job well done, because it's a better city that we live in from a sports culture because of him. His work was tireless, and he never, ever, ever saw anybody as an underdog. He saw everybody as a prize fighter, and that's exactly how we should all continue to treat people when we go on about our daily lives. But he will be missed. I know the guys that do the boxing lunch will miss him, but they'll still tell the same stories, and those stories are all because of the fact that he made it possible for those things to happen in Indianapolis. He'll be missed. Kevin Bowen will join us next. We'll get the latest on the Colts here on The Fan. There we go, Eddie. Chuck Mangione, by the way. I used to call in when I worked at the cigar store, and Gia Burns would be doing like one of the radio stations played jazz every night. That's what we played in the store, and I would call every single Saturday night and request a song because it was the only jazz song I knew. And she would play it. It's the benefits of knowing her dad, aside from being able to see Gold Gloves.
You didn't know any Louis Armstrong or Thelonious Monk or Duke Ellington?
I probably should have, some Jelly Roll Morton. I mean, Dizzy Gillespie.
Barbra Streisand, anything like that?
It was later that I took classes where I learned those things, Eddie. I wasn't what we call sophisticated as a younger man.
Okay.
Joining us now, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so based on that intro, on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. You hear him each and every morning from 7 until 10 a.m. with the wake-up call with KB and Andy. And inexplicably, for the fifth straight Friday, his phone called me while I was on the air like an hour ago. Kevin Bowen joins us on the program. Kevin, did my phone call you?
You called me at about 12:48, if my memory serves me correct. You also called me twice yesterday. I ignored the first one, assuming that it was just, the aliens again attacking me. And then I actually picked up the second time.
12:56,
and you were really
by the way.
Calling me.
12:56 is when it appears as though you called me and I called you at the same time. Somebody's playing some sort of joke on us, no question. All right, let's get to this. Colts Packers, who's in, who's out? The latest from today in practice. We mentioned it earlier, but what is the latest news, Kevin?
Julian Blackmon out, same right shoulder injury as last year. Actually, same body part in terms of that right shoulder that's leading him to not practice all week and be out. Shane Steichen said it's not serious, though. DeForest Buckner sounds like he's going to give it a go, so we could be getting the pitch count that we got last year in that Rams game for him, despite missing all of practice this week. Shane said he was very optimistic about Buckner playing. Josh Downs, I would call that a little bit more we'll see. I think that was the exact quote that Shane said. I don't know. It didn't sound like certainly the same vigor of optimism that he had about Buckner. Now, Downs did practice all week, but it was his first work in 5 weeks. So, could we be waiting one more game on Josh Downs? It seems to be a possibility. Who else? Kwity Paye practiced today. I would assume if he practices today that's a good sign. Matt Gay will kick coming up tomorrow or coming up Sunday.
Kevin, let's go back to the Julian Blackmon situation. That is one that I don't recall, and you correct me if I'm wrong here. That seemed to be kind of a later week injury that we realized the severity of it. Was there any indication as to – he's a really good player. I mean, I do like him, but obviously the injury bug has been there for him. Any indication, A, how long this goes, and B, that means that it is critically important for who?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, Jake, when you think about no Juju Brents, no Julian Blackmon, and neither of them got hurt during the game to the point where they needed to go in the blue tent or go in the locker room. I think Juju did get a little medical attention, but still not to that severity. Shane acted like it wasn't too severe with Julian, no injured reserve move. We'll see. I assume they don't do that before Sunday. If they did, obviously that would knock them out for 4 games. But, to me, he's one of the more indispensable players. I think I've long been a huge advocate of Julian Blackmon's. I think he's a really, really good, solid trustworthy football player in a variety of roles on the back end. So I think you're probably looking at a Nick Cross, Rodney Thomas duo, which is something we saw last season, 2 draft picks from a couple draft classes ago. They did bring Ronnie Harrison Jr. back to their practice squad earlier this week, so maybe he gets bumped up for some insurance on Sunday. But, the thing is, Blackmon, he got hurt in that Atlanta Christmas game last year, and I don't think we talked about it enough. Obviously, he got hurt rather early in that game, and the Atlanta game was a bleep show of a defensive performance. Then the next week, you kind of survived without him against Aiden O'Connell. And then C.J. Stroud, did what he did to you in Week 18. And, again, Blackmon was out for those 3 games. So if you look at Malik Willis, who is he? Is he Aiden O'Connell, or is he, can he find a little lightning in a bottle with a Taylor Heineke type of performance? So, again, down 2 secondary starters. If there's glass half full of it, look at the quarterbacks you play the next 3 weeks: Malik Willis, Caleb Williams, Justin Fields. But still, we have seen, guys with far less on their resume torch the Colts before.
With that, You mentioned Malik Willis, Kevin. Kevin Bowen, our guest. You hear him, of course, in the mornings with Andy Sweeney on the Wake Up Call with KB and Andy. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Kevin, Malik Willis may be, with Blackman being out and Juju Brents for that matter. I'll be honest with you. Like Malik Willis, I know that you mentioned the comparison factor there. Like a Taylor Heineke type performance. To me, Willis, you get a little bit of an ease or reprieve, not just because he never got footing in Tennessee, but also because, Green Bay wasn't expecting to have to put him in this position here, it would seem. And we don't know for certain if Jordan Love's going to play or not. But, Willis is kind of getting up to speed in his own right? I mean, doesn't it? You tell me if I'm wrong here. I have zero confidence that Malik Willis is going to be able to beat even a depleted Colts defensive backfield, right?
I would agree with that. I'd probably caution it with the same optimism you just kind of ended your voice inflection with, of like, right? It's sort of like a pleading of like,
yeah,
it better not. And I agree. The Willis Green Bay thing. First off, if we were doing this in Green Bay right now, I just can't believe that this is their backup situation. I mean, they were a Final Four team in the NFC. I think they are kind of, if I'm not mistaken, I think Eddie told me earlier this week that he picked Green Bay to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. Like, that's not a crazy thought. And if Jordan Love's going to miss 3 to 4 weeks or whatever the outlook looks for him, going 2-2 in that stretch versus 0-4 could be the difference between making the playoffs, winning the division, getting some sort of home field. So I'm more stunned at, like, this is the route that they're on because, again, Malik Willis come Sunday will have been a Packer, I think, for like 19 days. And it's not like he runs a Jordan Love offense, or at least theoretically he doesn't. I mean, Jordan Love is a pocket guy. Sure, if he has an avenue to run, he can do that. But he's much more throw first. Malik Willis's college, resume, and even I think a little bit in the NFL, it's a little bit more dual threat. So I don't know, did the extra day from Brazil all of a sudden lead Matt LaFleur to implementing a little bit more of that in their playbook? Who knows? So, Willis has been, again, he hasn't played in a while, but he has been one of the more sacked quarterbacks, frankly, in NFL history when he has played. There is, I think, very little evidence you can point to on film that would strike fear into you. Like, I guess Heineke, in Heineke's case, he did to the Colts in 2022. Jake Browning's case last year, there probably wasn't much of it. P.J. Walker, again, not much of it. But they at least had more than Willis. If Willis does this to you, if we're ranking the embarrassing levels to those losses, this would easily, take the cake as the top one.
By the way, Kevin, we haven't spoken to you, I don't think, since are you confident Notre Dame bounces back against Purdue?
No, I'm not. Eddie asked me if I was going to Ross 8, and I said no, and if I had the opportunity to go, I think I'd be too scared to go. So
the people in Lafayette are nice. What would fear you?
No,
what fear would you have?
No. Nothing against that. You have some great friends that got their degrees from the Black and Gold. Nothing against them. Great golf courses there. Nothing at all. Simply, I'm just scared of what I could see. Northern Illinois was shocking. This loss would just be sad. It would just make you sad. The sad gifts of people walking just alone and kicking the grass. That would be me walking back to my parked car on Ackerman Golf Course.
Okay, well, that's a ringing endorsement for Marcus Freeman and his group in terms of their ability to bounce back.
Ryan Walters, I've circled this game on the calendar and all that. Purdue has to be the most unknown college football team of any in the nation right now. They've had a bye, and they played JMV's alma mater. Nothing says, like, we know nothing about you, like that being your first 2 weeks of the season. And I get the schedule's about to, toughen up big time. But, I got nothing. I don't even know who Notre Dame's starting quarterback is tomorrow. So I will watch that with the most hesitation I've maybe ever watched a Notre Dame game with.
Kevin, I'll be honest with you. The other two teams that would be equally as unknown are probably the two that are playing in the Rose Bowl, right? Indiana, I think, is a new team with Curt Cignetti, and certainly what they did against Western Illinois was impressive, but Western Illinois is the worst program in college football. UCLA, new coach, new conference. That one also is totally enigmatic, is it not?
No, I think that's a good point. Yeah, and if you're Cignetti, you're Walters, I think in different ways, just huge opportunities for you. It's not every day producing the 3:30 slot on CBS. Not every day I use in the 7:30 slot on NBC. And if you're Purdue, you get a reeling, wounded, however you want to describe them, team in your own place, and that spread has changed a whole lot. And favored on the road against, again, a team that they were picked in that range with Indiana and Purdue. So, yeah, it's kind of weird. We sit here on a Friday and, like, such great opportunities for our local Big Ten teams.
Kevin, let's get back to Kevin Bowen, our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Colts and Packers coming up Sunday from Lambeau. Kevin, is Gus Bradley's seat? He's not on the hot seat because we're a game in, for crying out loud. But there does seem to be, and it's outside of 56th Street, but there seems to be an increased narrative of the Colts defense needing just kind of an overhaul, just kind of a makeover, if you will. Is Gus Bradley's seat warm?
I would say no. I mean, it's a question I asked Chris Ballard back in January at the end of the season. Again, loud each of the last two seasons, and Ballard really fell on the sword. I don't think one game into the season would all of a sudden change his plan. And, really when you look at it, Gus Bradley got a whole lot of sign-off from Chris Ballard, and then obviously Shane Steichen has history with him. So I get that, coordinators are scapegoats all the time. I mean, by Halloween we'll have, 5 coordinators fired in the NFL, and that'll be the thing that changes these NFL team seasons. I say that, a little tongue-in-cheek. Certainly Pep Hamilton probably fell into that back in 2015 with the Colts and losing to the Panthers in that Monday night game. So I just I guess I'm speaking from what I think the Colts believe. Like, again, I don't think they're thrilled with their defensive effort. They shouldn't be. But at the same time, I don't view him internally in that light. Something has to be answered for defensively because it is the same personnel. And, again, if these 60-minute efforts look more like they did week one as we get through September and deeper, then certainly some answers have to be had. I think like most things, Jake, it's a combination of that, and it's a little combination of personnel. And they've invested a whole lot, but, certainly in the secondary, they didn't invest, in my opinion, enough to offer some insurance. And who would have thought a week into the season that Juju Brents and Julian Blackmon would be hurt? It's unfortunate, but that's just the nature of, what the back of their baseball cards have been here in the NFL. So, Gus is a guy that, again, multiple regimes have signed off on, and something would it'd have to be a long string of this for, I think, those decision makers internally to view Gus in that light. Another thing to remember, pretty much all of his assistants on the defensive side of the ball are his guys. So, seemingly changing the defense, like, for example, when they fired Pep Hamilton, they went to Rob Chudzinski, and he had been an offensive coordinator, been a play caller, and it was a different offense, or at least it could have been a different offense. There's only so much you can do mid-season. Defensively, outside of maybe just a little bit more philosophical, hey, we're going to be more aggressive, it's not like you would do some things substantially different, whereas you have different voices on that defensive side of the ball.
Kevin, bigger, I guess, intrigue for you on Sunday. The Colts' inability to run the football and trying to – inability is maybe the wrong word. Which is a bigger – you're more intrigued by this, what Jonathan Taylor is going to be able to do against Green Bay, or the Colts and what they're going to try to do to stave the running game for Green Bay after getting thrashed in week one?
Yeah, it's probably the latter, just because I think Malik Willis does create a bit of an unknown there. And, yes, he shouldn't, or you don't think he'll challenge you in the passing game, but Willis can run. So, that's a little different wrinkle than what you would have guessed going into this game. I side with the Colts. I think the Colts sit there and think we're not worried about the Jonathan Taylor aspect of our run game. Yes, we didn't run it well in week one, but I think we will run it better eventually. And I agree with that. I think, they have some benefit of the doubt there, and just in general, I think that'll be kind of an anomaly sort of game, 3 yards per carry from him. So, yeah, it's probably more the latter. I would think that Taylor gets going. Certainly Richardson ran it great on the design run. So, and I get that's a little bit of a different run game, but I'd probably go with Willis and stopping Josh Jacobs as well.
Was there much discussion over the course of the week, Kevin, just about A.D. Mitchell? I think we knew that A.D. Mitchell is a guy that has the ability to be kind of a Josh Downs X-factor, slippery receiver guy, but there just was a timing that was off between he and Richardson clearly in week one. Much discussion about that this week?
Yeah, I think so. Just because, like, when you look at a box score for A.D. Mitchell, like, in 3 years, you go back to his first game and be like, wait, he had 5 targets and 1 catch for 2 yards? Like, if you just looked at it and said, I'm not going to pay attention to context, you'd call that an awful game. But again, in reality, A.D. Mitchell was wide the hell open on several plays. So it's a small sample size, but if we look at the last 2 extended runs for this offense, Sunday, of course, against Houston, and then if you go back to the preseason with the caveat of, yes, it is the preseason, when they were in Cincinnati for that mini dress rehearsal, Richardson and Mitchell have had issues hooking up. Their catch target percentage is not at the ratio that you would want it to be at. So I think it probably deserves some examining, a little bit more paying attention to it. Certainly if it continues to become the norm, then it is alarming. But I do walk away from week 1, and you can insert your Chris Ballard wideout jokes here, but I think walk away come pretty encouraged by what the wideouts showed in that, obviously Pittman didn't have a great day. Josh Downs didn't play. Pierce was great, and Mitchell, to me, was open on many different occasions. So, I think at times creating separation has been a question mark for this team. Well, you got to think Josh Downs, whenever he gets back, will get there. And again, A.D. Mitchell, showed at least in his first game he could do some of that. So obviously you need steadier moments in the passing game and all of that. But weirdly, I think you walk away encouraged by Mitchell, even though his stat line doesn't indicate that.
Kevin Bowen, our guest. Colts Packers coming up on Sunday. All right, going into the game, Kevin, the storyline that when you are scanning the dial and you listen to myself or you listen to John or when you're reading about the game that you think to yourself, you know what? Here's something to keep an eye on that seems to be kind of an off-the-radar thing in terms of the Colts or what Green Bay is going to try to do against them that may surprise people. What is it?
I might be putting too much into this, but we're really looking at Anthony Richardson's first extended road action of his NFL career. He got hurt very early in that Houston game back in week 2 of last season. He was playing great in that game for what it's worth. But I would think Lambeau home opener will be a slightly different environment than, NRG Stadium. So I don't know, if he's got to go silent count or if you get moments kind of late in the first half or late in the game where crowd noise does impact some things. How does Richardson handle that? Obviously, he played in the SEC, so I don't think, loud crowds should be for him. But it's just a different wrinkle that, weirdly, all of his NFL playing time so far, all of it, but that Houston game has come inside of a dome, period. But, mostly at Lucas Oil Stadium as well. So it's just maybe how he handles it, how the offense handles it. Are there, again, communication issues, getting your offensive line set from a protection standpoint? Because I do think the one thing about Green Bay is, as wild as it is to me that, like, Malik Willis is their backup and how much I would disagree with that if we were really examining Green Bay, I really think they have a pretty good football team outside of their current situation at quarterback. It looks like they're pretty healthy besides that. So, again, they have some guys that I think can cause some stress for you, offensively. Willis has got to do his part getting into it. But, yeah, I just think Richardson – kind of enters a new chapter of, here's road football and, how do you play? And certainly one of the more hallowed grounds in the NFL.
Kevin, I think I saw you mention Lambeau as, I can't remember if you said that it's like a college football game with an NFL stadium or if you said it's kind of like Speedway where you're walking through like a neighborhood with houses and you turn the corner and boom, there it is. But either way, for people that are going up, the Kevin Bowen Cliff Notes of Lambeau and the Green Bay experience.
Yeah, well, first off, I would describe it in both of those ways. I probably have. I think it's very reminiscent of that. I think it's got a super college tailgate feel. And it does remind me of that final Sunday in May of just this is like really, really cool. And you can just tell that this town just adores it. I mean, Green Bay does not have a hotel that can host an NFL team, yet they have an NFL team. It's just kind of wild that, like, Green Bay has stood the test of time in the 1,000-pound gorilla that is the NFL. And so I would encourage people to certainly, enjoy that tailgate experience, walk around. It was funny. We had Jason Wilde from ESPN Wisconsin on our show earlier this week, and he mentioned that they offer stadium tours on Saturdays. So, if you're getting up there early I would do that. I'm sure it's changed in the 8 years since I've been there, but there was like no corporate feel whatsoever to being in that stadium. And it just was an authentic, like, football stadium. The visiting tunnel is super small, super skinny. That's kind of a unique thing as well. So, yeah, I just think it's really cool. And you and I probably both fall in the boat of, at times, Jake, we're a little too sentimental with some of the sports stuff. But I think Lambeau certainly lives up to it.
I mean, it's just cool. And then, on top of that, Kevin, like the fact that during training camp, which is in Green Bay, like the kids that live in Green Bay bring their bicycle and players get to select. Right. I remember Derek Mays from, who played for the Packers, played at Notre Dame, telling me once that, like, he picked some kid's bike, and he's like, I didn't think about it ahead of time, but the bike was for, like, a 5-year-old. You know what I mean? It's pretty cool, right? All of it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think you saw. I want to say they did joint practices with the Packers this year, and with the Ravens this year. And here's Lamar Jackson doing the bike thing with some of these fans. It's just, again, obviously the NFL game has become super global and corporate-y, and you look at these stadiums and it's incredible, the field suites and the jumbotrons and all of that. And I just think Green Bay is a bit of a throwback. So once every 8 years, sounds like a good amount of Colts fans are going to be up there. It looks like a beautiful day. It should be a fun time just from an atmosphere standpoint.
Lastly, Kevin, and Eddie punted on this. Eddie deferred. He did not take the bait, but we had Mike Vanderjagt on earlier, and I thought he was very transparent, so I've just declared it a Transparency Friday. Anything you need to get off your chest?
Well, it's on my list to listen to you and Mike Vanderjagt. Eddie had informed me that it was a tremendous, tremendous listen. So
Kevin was not listening at noon, thus confession. Okay, any other confessions?
Well, Shane's second press conference, I believe, the same time that maybe you were airing the Mike Vanderjagt interview. So,
okay, excused.
I was not just laying on my couch, just stuffing my face with tacos or something here. What do I need to get off my chest? Boy, I'm so nervous about Notre Dame. Have I mentioned that?
You mean about this game or about the season in general?
Both. Saturday was a question of fandom type day for me. And, it's probably a bit of like, hey, I'm about to turn 35 years old. I might need to look in the mirror moment there. But, gosh, I just cannot believe that happened. Like, the highs of Texas A&M, me cackling at Brian Kelly in the season opening loss, and then how quickly you are brought back to reality as a sports fan with watching Northern Illinois. And if I weren't a fan of Notre Dame, like Northern Illinois and that scene post-game and Thomas Hammond, that's everything I love about sports. And yet here I am just pissed off like none other. So if I could be transparent, I would just say I've thought about my fandom. And I don't think it's going to change, if I'm going to be fully honest with you, but thank you for letting me talk about it out loud.
It is a nostalgic football weekend. Colts in Green Bay, Purdue-Notre Dame rivalry, Indiana back in the Rose Bowl, and, of course, Kevin and Andy will be talking about all of that and more coming up on Monday, 7 o'clock for the wake-up call with KB and Andy. Kevin, enjoy the weekend, all right?
Jake, enjoy the pedal bars. We'll talk to you.
That's right. I am right here. I'm 2 blocks from Broadway in Nashville, and it is now. Here's the one thing that I have a little concern about the weekend in Nashville that I'll get to here on the other side. But it's going to be offset. My concern is offset by the fact that it's not only a transparency, but it's a feel-good Friday from Franciscan Health. Got a couple of stories to help you feel good about sports heading into the weekend, and we'll do it next here on The Fan. So here's the thing about being in Nashville for IndyCar. And, I told you folks about the situation. I got a little bit more information on it with John Bon Jovi that took place over the course of the weekend. I think I mentioned it yesterday on the show in detail. But apparently John Bon Jovi was filming a music video. I don't know if I shared that yesterday in Nashville when he was on one of there are two bridges that go over the Cumberland River. One of them is a pedestrian bridge. He was on that filming a music video when, whether it was himself or someone in his group, saw a distressed woman that was standing on the bridge, assumed to be, in despair, obviously, and I don't know if contemplating suicide or just simply contemplating life, whatever it might be. But surveillance video had caught John Bon Jovi talking to the woman and then initially getting her back on the right side of the bridge, hugging her. And that woman apparently now, the word here in Nashville is that she is now in a treatment facility for mental health. So a positive result with that. Later this afternoon, and this is weather permitting in terms of the NTT IndyCar season finale that's taking place at the Nashville Superspeedway. Now, many of you may remember that for the last 2 years, the Nashville race has been a street course race that has gone through the streets of Nashville and then around Nissan Stadium. But because they are building a new stadium here, that has put an impediment just in terms of being able to do that, and so they moved the race to the Oval, which is about 45 miles from here, but everything is kind of epicentered in terms of the celebration of it, and Nashville's done a really good job of still embracing the fact that it's race weekend here. The walk bridges where the John Bon Jovi video that came out, the surveillance video, you could see all of the banners for IndyCar. They are tonight doing from 4 until 7 p.m. local time, so 5 until 8 p.m. Indianapolis time. Broadway, which is the main thoroughfare of all of the honky-tonk bars in Nashville, they are clearing that out and having a pit stop competition. Myself and Tony Kanaan will be the broadcasters for the competition. I don't know if that's upsetting like 25,000 bachelorettes in Nashville, because typically everything's going to be done by 8 p.m. So, hell, it gets roaring around 10, right?
I'm shocked that you say bachelorettes would be upset that you were hosting something, Jake.
Well, listen, Eric, I'm not going to lie to you.
Is this part of your maturity?
Ever since the survey took place where Derek Schultz actually beat me out in our head-to-head on which of the two of us is the sexier individual, I've just given up all hope anyway.
So your confidence is fractured right now is what you're saying.
That's right. My confidence is – I'm like Mike Vanderjagt, right? I'm just I don't know. Look, I have no reason to think of that, obviously, but, and that I'm the old guy also. But nonetheless, going to be upset bachelorettes throughout Nashville, Tennessee. And can you believe, by the way, this is the first time I've been to Nashville where Shannon did not come with me. And I think it's because she got tired of the pedal bars right outside here on Broadway. So we have that in common as well, just so you know. By the way, it is so that takes place, and then the race, I was going to also mention, the weather forecast does not look great. But the initial word is that they will do everything they can to get the race in on Sunday and not run it on Monday, and that we will have a season champion by Monday. So we shall see how that goes. It is a Friday, though. It was a Transparency Friday earlier because of Mike Vanderjagt's transparency on the show. Eddie will have that podcast available on the Podcast Center, where you can hear him talking about the kick against Pittsburgh, his relationship with Peyton Manning, amongst other things. But it's a feel-good Friday from Franciscan Health. Because did you know, folks, that men and women over the age of 40 that have at least one risk of heart disease, already at the age of 40, you should start getting that heart scan to make sure that you are staying on top of your cardiovascular health. Now, those risks include if you are, suffering from high blood pressure or cholesterol, if you have diabetes, if you're obese, you're a current or former smoker, or, and this is the one that got me, you have a family history of heart disease. Then you want to and heart disease, by the way, I think a lot of people hear heart disease and they think, well, I don't have a disease. I would know if I'm diseased. Simply means some sort of an ailment or an issue within your heart, okay? You want to make sure that you're going to get a heart scan for just $49, very affordable from Franciscan Health. And heart scans at just $49, you can self-refer it, you can pay out of pocket, and you get a free heart health risk assessment included in every screening. A lot of people probably are like, what is a heart scan exactly? It's non-invasive. You lay down, you basically go through a tube for, You're in there for seconds, maybe a minute. And they are able to then see whether you have calcium buildup or anything that is at the potential of sealing off or closing your arteries within your heart, which is what happened to me. I had a 100% blockage, which led to a heart attack. You do not want to go through that. It is very simple to be preventative about that. And when you're doing that, you want to make sure you're doing it at the place that is the number one heart program in Indiana for cardiology by Health Grades, number one in Indiana for interventional coronary care and major cardiac surgery by CareChecks. And, of course, as I mentioned, very affordable and easy to do. Two stories for you that I wanted to share. One of them does involve racing. Earlier this week, we had Debbie Antonelli on the program. She, of course, doing the television broadcast for The Fever. And we were talking about the Special Olympics and how wonderful Special Olympics are. And in that capacity, I got a phone call from a guy that said, hey, Jake, IMSA, which is, of course, the sports car race, the endurance race, 6-hour race that's going to be taking place at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in a couple of weeks, has a lot of teams that are based right here in central Indiana. One of those teams, one of the guys involved in the team, does have a son that is in the autism spectrum, and as a result of that is involved in Special Olympics and other avenues of school with different kids that are overcoming those sorts of challenges. And he thought, you know what better way to get kids out into the community and have them feel a part of things than to come out and be part of the IMSA community. So he and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway partnered together to bring a number of kids that are part of the Unified Sports Program over in Hendricks County. And when I talk about Unified Sports, we've talked about it. Avon, Brownsburg, those schools have it. And that is where students that are involved in Special Olympics get partnered with students that are involved in the regular sports at school, and they play together on a team. And oftentimes, that is more beneficial to the student that is the non-Special Olympian than the Special Olympian themselves. But the whole idea is that while theoretically Special Olympics kids, you think to yourself, well, this Unified Sports Program is wonderful because they're able to take benefit from the varsity athlete kids and all that goes into that. This is an opportunity for those varsity athlete kids to be able to come out to the Speedway because of their affiliation with the Special Olympics kids. And all of a sudden, now it's the varsity kids that are benefiting from the relationship. And they're the ones, the Special Olympians, that are creating the connections. And it's that ability for them to just feel like a normal high school kid that I absolutely love. And that's the whole goal, I think, of Unified Sports and those things that take place. Because sports, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes is just about confidence and belief, which leads me to the other story that I came across this week. I want to tell you about Harvinder Singh. And I realize Harvinder Singh, Jake, I've never heard of Harvinder Singh. And there's no reason really that you should, except for that his story jumped out at me, and I thought it was pretty awesome. Harvinder Singh lives in India, and as a young boy in India, he had some ailments very, very young that caused him to have to undergo a number of different treatments to overcome a virus and a condition that he was born. But unfortunately, complications from that led to him having a disability within his legs and a paralysis below the waist. So doctors told him, you know what, you're going to have to be really focused just to lead a normal life. You're going to have to be really, really specific on attention to detail to find ways that you can make a difference without having to use your legs. But he wanted to participate in sports, just like the kids in the Unified Sports over at Avon and in Brownsburg that are going to be able to spend a day at the Speedway with their classmates and the football and basketball and volleyball team. That's all Harvinder wanted to do. So he said, well, what can I do that parlays focus and attention into detail and athletics? So he became an archer because he said, I read about the fact that it's a sport that requires the most focus and the most attention to detail, and I didn't have to use my legs. He became not only an archer in India that was doing things that people hadn't seen before in terms of his accuracy in competition, but he then qualified for the Paralympics in 2020 where he won a bronze medal. He won a bronze medal. He came back to India. They celebrated the fact that here was a man from India that had won the first medal in Paralympic history for that country. And when asked about it, they said, what are you going to do with your bronze medal? And he said, in 4 years, I'm going to change its color. because he continued to set for himself a higher standard, a higher goal within the precision, the focus, and the mental fortitude of archery. So last week, what did he do? He returned to India with a gold medal from the 2024 Paralympics in Paris. And when he was asked about the pride of being able to do better than what he did in Tokyo, and he was given the Ultimate Citizen Award in the country of India, that was when he announced actually that he was more proud of the fact that he had just completed his PhD and done so within kinesiology and physical education, because he wanted to be able to work with kids and people that have that limitation going forward to help them turn the color of something that others were proud of, but they strived for even more. I thought it was a very cool story, and it's the kind of thing that shows you that no matter what you might think of somebody else's limitation, with the right focus, the right opportunity, and like in Avon and Brownsburg, the opportunity to be able to reach other people, they too can get to the goals of where they need to be. We'll come back. We'll get Jimmy's plays of the day and put a tie on all of it on this transparency. Feel good, good for the Heart Friday.
Today's Plays of the Day brought to you by the fine folks at Greenfield Signs and Lighting. Greenfield Signs, a professional comprehensive sign company with 2 locations in central Indiana. They'll take your signage ideas and take hold of the project from design all the way to delivery. Family owned and managed for more than 4 generations. You don't often get a second chance to make a first impression. Make the most out of your first opportunity with Greenfield Signs and Lighting. For more information, go to greenfieldsigns.com. Couple plays today and then action for the Monster Sports Weekend. We'll start first in baseball. Give me cute fella.
Hey, root for me.
The Baltimore Orioles twin on the money line over the Detroit Tigers in Detroit. We'll also take the Boston Red Sox to win outright on the money line over the New York Yankees. In college football, scoop the 9.5 on the Purdue Boilermakers as they host the reeling Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Also, give me Indiana. I'll take the Indiana Hoosiers to win outright in the Rose Bowl over UCLA. Last college football bet for you, we'll take Travis Hunter of Colorado as an anytime touchdown scorer. In the NFL, scoop the 6 for the Cincinnati Bengals. They are 6-point dogs at Arrowhead Stadium. We'll take the Jacksonville Jaguars to win on the money line over the Cleveland Browns. And fellas, since I'm not here to make the full prediction, we'll include them in the plays of the day. Give me the Colts outright 27-17 winners over the Green Bay Packers. Eddie, any plays for you? Otherwise, have a great weekend, gentlemen, and those are your plays of the day.
No plays. No plays for me, Jake.
I was going to say, he asked you a question there.
Sorry, right? I was recording something in here, and I forgot to put my mic back on in the right program or whatever, so YouTube audience got to hear the whole flub up there, but the radio audience did not.
By the way, should we just tell everybody real quick that since it's a Transparency Friday, should we tell everybody of the transparency issue that we ran into about 12:45 today?
That's debatable. That's up to you. You're the host. I mean, we powered through it, Jake. We just had some adversity we had to overcome, right?
Well, I think I'll put it on me. How's that? I'll put it on me because I'm on the road. I'm obviously using a mobile unit, and all of a sudden, thankfully, thank goodness that we had the interview with Vanderjagt, right? That was recorded.
Yes. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, everything just went kaput. I think I might have unplugged something. So I'm FaceTiming you. And let me tell you, if people could see, you could probably see my haste in trying to figure all that out with wires everywhere. And I think I dropped a drink onto the floor in my hotel room. It was a bit of a disaster. And we got it back up and running with 15 seconds to spare?
Literally 15 seconds to spare in the part 2 of our interview with Mike Vanderjagt. Yeah.
I was quite proud of myself, but I like you said, well, just FaceTime me. Okay. So, and then at one point too, so I'm FaceTiming you and we're figuring out these wires and buttons and bulbs and everything else. And you're trying to tell me what to plug in here and there. And about halfway through it, you go, that's a pretty nice hotel room, by the way.
Yep.
I said, well, hey, we do the Howard Johnsons, they take care of us here, right?
Yeah. I told you that the room that in my house where I have my setup is pretty much the same color as yours.
That's right. I'm glad to see that you've got the Howard Johnsons decorating your room as well. Okay, you said 20, or somebody said 27-17 for the Colts. That kind of steals my thunder. I went 27-19. 27-19 Colts win. I just don't see Green Bay putting up points. Eddie, your thoughts?
Earlier in the week on Colts Corner with Kevin Bowen, I said 26-13. I'm changing that a little bit. I will go 28-13. So I think the Colts put up a big number offensively just because I trust Shane Steichen.
Okay, John is up next. He will be at the Ale Emporium in Castleton, so plenty of time to get up there and enjoy his program live. We will be back with you on Monday, obviously, to recap what takes place for the Colts in the big weekend in college football. Thanks again, Kyle Neddenriep, Kevin Bowen, and Mike Vanderjagt. That Mike Vanderjagt interview available on the Podcast Center at 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. You folks have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for listening to Query & Company.